My name is Paula Price. I'm with the People's Law School, and I'm hosting our webinar today with our guest, David Brown. And David Brown is an employment lawyer with Kent Employment Law, and he's joining us from Kelowna. So we have now got our poll results, and we can see that the majority of you are workers. That's excellent. We're so glad that we can reach you. And a good number of you are helping others with their legal problems. So delighted to have you here with us. Thank you so much for joining. We're really excited for today's presentation. Now, as the title of our webinar suggests, this is a webinar for workers in British Columbia. So if you've joined us from out of province, you are absolutely welcome. We love having you here. Just note that the rules may be different in your province. And we will be answering your questions about EI and emergency benefits. So what you can expect over the next 45 minutes is we'll be answering common questions. So these are questions that have come in to the People's Law School through our website. They're also questions that have come in to David and his team over at Kent Employment Law. What we're offering is legal information, not advice. And so we're not creating a lawyer-client relationship. If what you're looking for is the law as it applies to your specific circumstances, you would need to take that extra step of seeking legal advice. And one final note, the law in this area is changing quite rapidly. And so we're April 21st, 2020 today, and the information that we're presenting is current as of today. If you're watching a replay of this video in the future, you'll just want to make sure that you are up to speed. In terms of questions and comments, we'd love to hear from you as this webinar continues. And so there is a Q&A function on your toolbar. That is where you should submit any questions that you have that you want to be answered. If you see a question go up that you like, then like that question. That will let us know that there's more than one of you who has that question. And if you'd like to submit your question anonymously, you can check the box to do that. And we'll be trying to get to your questions at the end of today's webinar. We'll see how much time we have once we get through the material. There's quite a bit for us to cover. The second button is the chat, and that is really for comments or any tech questions that come up, and you'll want to click who it goes to, so either panelists or all attendees. And I mentioned a moment ago the distinction between legal information and legal advice. If what you're seeking is legal advice, feel free to reach out to David and his team at Kent Employment Law, and the email link is below. And we're getting closer to introducing our guest speaker today. Before we do that, we'd just like to make a few acknowledgements. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which our People's Law School team is gathered is the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, made up of the Squamish Nation, the Musqueam First Nation, and the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. And David joins us from Kelowna, which we acknowledge is the unceded territory of the Silks Okanagan peoples. And we recognize that we've got participants. I noticed we've now got 200 participants from across the province, and so we extend that acknowledgement throughout British Columbia. We'd also like to thank the Law Foundation. They are the People's Law School's primary funder, and they support law-related programs and projects that benefit the public, and they have made this webinar possible. And finally, we'd like to thank everybody for the opportunity to have this webinar, to host it. And I'd like to extend a special thank you to the team at it's my face on the screen, but it's the collective effort from a whole number of people. Our executive director, Patricia Byrne, who has launched this webinar initiative, our senior content producer, Drew Jackson, who is behind the scenes right now at the control panels, making sure everything runs smoothly. And we've got David Candestin and Spencer Keane, who are also behind the scenes manning the chat and the Q&A, and a number of other players back at our team at our virtual home base. So thank you, everybody. And without further ado, our guest today, David Brown. David is an employment lawyer with Kent Employment Law. He is the leader of their Kelowna office. He's a trusted workplace advisor to individuals and companies in the Okanagan. And welcome, David. So great to have you here.
It's really fantastic being here. Thank you for this fantastic opportunity to speak with the People's Law School and to the, I'm seeing now over 200 participants that are phoning in for this webinar. I think this is just fantastic, and it certainly does show the interest in this topic.
Absolutely, David. It is a topic that is on the minds of so many people, and we're delighted to have you here. So tell us a little bit, before we hop into the substance, how are things on the ground for you?
Well, it's we are living through interesting times right now. Obviously, you can see from where I am, I'm in my home office. If you listen really carefully, you can probably hear the stampeding elephants above me, which are my children, 2 and 4 years old. And outside my window, I've got contractors refinishing the outside of my house. So all of this makes for a really challenging environment to be working in on a day-to-day basis, but like, we're adapting. At Kent Employment Law, obviously, we're right in the thick of COVID-19, at least as it relates to issues that come back to our workplace. So we're dealing with a lot of calls from people undergoing a tremendous amount of stress and anxiety right now because they're facing job disruption or layoffs, or there's uncertainty about what's coming next for them. We're also dealing with a lot of business owners and companies that are facing very similar anxieties around the status of the economy and trying to balance concerns for their bottom line with concerns for their workers. So we are certainly living through interesting times, really unprecedented times, but I hope we're up to the task.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're doing some great work, David. And if it's any consolation, I cannot hear the elephants jumping on your ceiling.
Good. Well, that's I take some comfort in that.
Yeah. So we'll jump in, David. So the first question that we have is, what are the benefits that are being offered to workers in British Columbia?
Well, as your screen here shows out, over the course of the last 6 weeks or so, we've had some brand new benefits that are coming out that are made available to workers through various government programs. Now, some of these, like EI, as we can see there, that continues to exist in some capacity. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that a little bit over the course of the day. But the real important timeline here is this date of March 15th. On March 15th, that's when the old programs that had been existing up until that point kind of hit a bit of a wall, and then we start seeing the introduction of these new ones that are coming down the line. So for example, CERB, this has been all over the media over the course of the last couple of weeks. This is this large government program that's providing $2,000 a month to workers that are being displaced by the COVID-19 pandemic and the economic recession that's following that. On a more close to home, we've seen benefit announcements coming from the British Columbia government, the BC Emergency Benefit for Workers. This one's not yet live yet, but we're expecting it's going to be made live in the next little bit here. And this is going to provide a $1,000 one-time payment for workers again, who are disrupted by COVID-19. And then we're also seeing a couple of different emergency wage subsidy programs. This is really designed for employers primarily, but with the ultimate intention of keeping people job attached. So there's 2 programs that we're looking at there. The first is the temporary wage subsidy program for workers, very aptly named. It speaks to exactly what it is. This is a 10% wage subsidy that's available for select businesses. Typically, we're looking at certain qualifying small businesses, nonprofits, companies of that nature. And then we're seeing the much broader, the much larger program, which is the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. And that's the one that's been getting an awful lot of news media over the course of the last few weeks, providing for up to 75% of workers' wages if you're working in a business that's seen a 30% reduction in revenue over the course of the last year, like year over year. So obviously there's a lot here to work through. There's a lot of benefits that our governments are putting out to try to keep people afloat while we kind of work through these very, very uncertain times.
Yeah, thank you for that, David. I mean, it really highlights that there are a number of different initiatives that are being made to help workers, and really appreciate that we have you here today to help clarify which benefits are going to help which individuals.
Right.
You mentioned this, the CERB, and that this is getting a lot of attention. It was really brought in to, I understand, fill the gaps where EI wasn't really going to to be able to cover everybody. So, so tell us a bit more. Like, what are the eligibility requirements for the CERB benefit?
Well, there's 4 basic requirements in order to be eligible for this program, and they're actually not terribly complicated. They're not very difficult to meet for most people. Number 1, you got to be residing in Canada, and you have to be over 15 years of age, and this makes perfect sense. But you know that can be difficult for people that are living abroad right now. But this program is designed to be for people who are currently residing in Canada. Number 2, you have to be facing a job disruption or a significant job reduction because of COVID-19. And so this can apply to people, for example, who are staying at home caring for children that are disrupted because schools are closed. This can include staying home to care for loved ones who are affected by the CERB, that are affected by COVID-19. So if you have somebody that's ill, and you're providing care to them, then you meet that requirement. This will also apply to people who are facing a significant reduction in their hours of work or are laid off entirely, and they'll kind of meet that eligibility requirement for the CERB. Next is that you have to be able to demonstrate that you made $5,000 over the course of the previous calendar year or in the 2019 calendar year. I think the reason why we make that kind of strange distinction between calendar 2019 and the previous 12-month span is to make sure that we're actually providing coverage for people that are coming off of maternity benefits or some of these significant lengthy benefit leaves. But there's still that requirement there where you have to make $5,000 within that 12-month window. And then finally, we recognize that in order to be eligible for the CERB, you cannot leave your job voluntarily. Now, we might provide a little bit more comment on this a little bit later, but for most people, if you're unhappy with the management of your business, or you just have insecurity about the management of the business and the current status quo, that may make you ineligible for CERB benefits on a go-forward basis, unless there's some kind of rationale behind that. So generally speaking, you cannot voluntarily leave your job. You have to be displaced from the job itself.
Okay, excellent. And assuming that you meet the eligibility requirements for the CERB, how much are you entitled to receive?
Right, so that's a great question. The eligibility amounts for the CERB are $2,000 a month. Now, we've been doing, through our social media channels, we've been doing videos, and we've received a lot of comments from the public about this $2,000, because I've had some people who have come forward and say, well, under employment insurance, under the old rules, I would have received slightly more than this. It doesn't matter. With the CERB, everybody is getting the same amount. So the same also applies for people who would have otherwise received less than $2,000 a month under the old EI program. They are still going to be receiving the same eligibility benefits, the same $2,000. It's the same amount for everybody. And once you're eligible for the CERB program, you can expect to receive those benefits for up to 16 weeks.
Okay, so I gather from that then, David, that compared to the calculation used for EI benefits, you may come out a bit ahead or you may come out a bit under. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a pretty fair comment. So under the EI system that would have been applying basically up till that March 15th date, there was a little bit more of a complicated calculation process. It would have been about 55% of your gross income up to, I think it was about $52,000 a year. So what this actually ended up meaning is that for eligible recipients on a weekly basis, the maximum amount that you could receive, I think it was about $560 some a month. Now, you do simple math, there's roughly 4 weeks in a month. 560 times 4 makes it to be a little bit more than $2,000 that's being offered under the CERB. So you're absolutely right. Some people may have been eligible for a little bit more under the EI system, but by the same token, if you were somebody that was making $30,000 a year annually, you may have only been receiving about $300 or $350 a month with your EI checks, and now you'll be, $350 a week, so significantly less than $2,000, but now you'll be making that $2,000. I think what they've kind of done here is to make the process as streamlined and as transparent as possible. They're basically just doing an averaged amount that everybody's going to be getting the same amount on.
Okay, thank you so much for clarifying that, David. Another question that we have is looking at the CERB versus employment insurance. Are the CERB benefits taxable?
Yeah, this one is causing a lot of confusion because what we're hearing from people who are kind of just starting to receive their first CERB checks now is that there being a lot of these amounts that are before taxes. Essentially, you're receiving the gross amount, and they're not having any income tax deducted off of them. And that's a little bit of change in process because under the EI rules, you would have had that income tax being deducted off of your regular checks. Don't lose sight of this. The CERB benefits are taxable income. And so if you're getting your checks right now and you're going out and you're spending the full amount of them, you can expect that there's going to be a tax bill of some kind, next February when it's time to file your income taxes. So you just need to be mindful of that. Now, I think what the government is doing is, again, they want to issue these checks as quickly as possible. Secondly, they understand that there's a lot of financial uncertainty right now, and you've had people who relied on high income wages and are now only getting $2,000 a month. So I think they recognize that, we'll deal with the recapture problem later. Let's just get the money out to people right now. But as the rules stand right now, you have to anticipate there might be taxes payable on these CERB benefits. Now, we'll stay tuned. There might be future government announcements to say that they're going to be forgiving taxes on these amounts, but as it is right now, that is not the case. These are taxable benefits.
Thank you so much for clarifying that, David, because that's people really need to know, right? As an EI benefit, you can spend the money without being concerned that at some point down the road, you'll need to be paying a portion of that back. But here it's important for people to keep that in mind. So it's a key point.
Certainly.
Turning to the next question, we're going to put your virtual athletic skills to the test because I'm going to lob over a number of scenarios. And this is a question that I think our viewers will be really interested in. We've had a number of questions from people in different situations who want to know if they're eligible for benefits. And so I'm going to lob these over and love to hear what you have to say. So what if you are still employed part-time? Would you be ineligible for benefits?
Yeah, great question. And the answer is a typical lawyer answer. It's going to depend. So a couple of different scenarios where we can think of this. The rules that the government has given to us right now is that if you are making less than $1,000 a month working part-time or through some other form of gig employment or whatever the case may be, you will still be eligible for the CERB benefits. So you'll be able to keep the $1,000 and be eligible for your additional $2,000. Now, how this might apply in practice is if you're working for an employer, or maybe previously you were full-time, but now as a result of COVID-19, your hours are being dramatically cut back, and maybe now you're working less than 10 hours a week and making less than this $1,000 a month. You will be eligible. Another way of thinking about this is maybe you're like many people out there who've got 2 jobs. So maybe you're working full-time at an office, and then maybe you're working part-time somewhere else, evenings and weekends, things like that, just to kind of get additional money. If you lose the full-time job and you still got that little side job on the side, you will be eligible for your CERB benefits if you're making less than the $1,000 a month. The catch-22 here, though, is that if you make more than $1,000 a month, that will have to be declared and you will likely lose those benefits.
Excellent. Thank you, David. And you may have highlighted this. This was a recent amendment, was it?
Yeah, so to my understanding, that was not included in the original kind of CERB announcement that would have happened back at the end of March. The government was kind of working through some of the cracks in the policy, and they acknowledged that people that are having more than one job would certainly be affected by this. So my understanding is that announcement was made last week, where they're now including part-time workers who are making less than $1,000 a month. It's also going to apply for example, if you were, maybe you've got a little job on the side doing skip the dishes or something like that. So if you're engaged in self-employment through like the gig economy or through selling other services or crafts or whatever the case may be, those same rules will apply to you here.
Excellent. Okay, I've got another, thank you. I've got another what if. What if you're self-employed? Are you eligible for benefits?
Yeah. This one is kind of tricky because if you're self-employed, you're probably going to have a little bit more control over your hours. But technically speaking, absolutely. If you are self-employed and your business is basically completely, decimated by COVID-19 and you lose all your clients, or maybe you only had like one or two major clients and they kind of cut off your services, you will be eligible for these benefits. Again, kind of coming back to that $1,000 a month threshold, that if you're continuing to be operational on some level and you're making less than $1,000 a month, you will be eligible for the CERB. In practice, though, this becomes a little bit more difficult because a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people that are in business, a lot of sole practitioners, they have a little bit more flexibility with their time. And of course, they're out there pounding the pavement trying to find work wherever they can get it. So in practice, it might be a little bit more difficult to show that.
Thank you, David. I've got another one. What if you're sick and unable to work? Then what can you do?
Right. So here, good question. This one's going to come down to why are you sick? You will likely be eligible for benefits. It's going to be just trying to decipher, though, which kind of category you're going to fall into. So if you're going to be ill with something related to COVID-19, so maybe, heaven forbid, you catch the virus and you're off work for, a period of time, then you will, of course, be eligible for your CERB benefits. But if you are sick for some other reason while we're going through this pandemic, you catch something else that's preventing you from working, then in that circumstance, if your job is still available to you, but you're unable to work because of some health condition unrelated to COVID-19, in those circumstances, you're probably going to go and apply for medical employment insurance, which is kind of like a different branch of EI. Or what you might be able to do if you have them is you might have short-term or long-term disability benefits that you could look into.
Thank you, David. It's great to learn that there are these distinctions that we should be.
Yeah, there are distinctions. So in that case, if you have a non-COVID-19 related illness that's preventing you from work, you would be receiving regular employment insurance benefits.
Excellent. My next question is a little bit of a shout out to all the overnight homeschoolers out there. What if you need to stay home to look after your children? Is there any help for you?
Yeah, there is. And I think I may have mentioned this in the introduction to the CERB. So for people who are all of a sudden parenting from home and having to homeschool children, clearly, schools, while they're places of education, they're also childcare providers in a sense, right? So if you're now obligated to stay home with your young children because of COVID-19, that will be considered a COVID-19 related job disruption. You will be eligible for CERB benefits.
Excellent. A few more. You're almost done with this round of questioning. You're doing very well.
Loving it.
What if you have recently exhausted your EI benefits? It's unlikely that you'll find new employment in this climate. What can you do?
So just like the part-time workers, this was an announcement that was made last week. So to kind of paint the scenario here, imagine that you were laid off or you lost your job last year. So maybe you lost your job in February of 2019. you've spent the entire year looking for work, and now you're coming to the end of your regular employment insurance benefits, but you're coming into a job market that's being devastated by COVID-19, right? So for those people, we've got some good news. What the government is doing is they just modified the regulations dealing with the CERB to encompass people in that scenario, meaning that if you lost your job or if your employment insurance benefits came to their conclusion, basically in the 2020 calendar year, you will be eligible to have those transferred into CERB benefits. So there will be a continuation of those benefits for you, because ultimately here, there's no jobs to find right now, right? Like with businesses being shut down, the job market is just being completely decimated. And I think government authorities are recognizing the hardship that that's going to be creating for people.
Thank you. What about students? Because there are a lot of university students, for example, who rely on their income and summer employment to get them through the year. Is there anything available for them?
Right. So students, in a sense, are going to kind of be in a similar pattern to what we just saw with these EI recipients, where their benefits are coming to an end, in that you have kind of a defined length of time where you're planning on doing work. You're entering into the job market in the middle of COVID-19. As it currently stands, now I just want to put a timestamp on this one. As of April 21, I do not know of any benefits that are eligible for students that are entering the workforce right now. Thinking of like the university and college students out there that are looking to make some income over the summer. I do not know of any benefits. Now that being said, Prime Minister Trudeau, in one of the announcements that he made last week on that, he recognized that this is still outstanding. He recognizes this is an issue, and I expect that there is going to be an announcement relatively shortly offering some kind of financial relief to students in this scenario.
Thank
What
you
that
so
looks
much,
like, I
Dave.
don't know, but I'm expecting there will be some further changes to existing programming.
Thank you. Thank you. One last, what if you've done so well? What if I quit my job? What if somebody quit?
Yeah, so I kind of touched on this very briefly in the eligibility requirements, in that you cannot, here's the very appropriate word here, voluntarily quit your job. So what does that mean? Well, if you don't like your boss and you don't like your job and you're unhappy, like this is not the opportunity for you just to say, you know what, I'm moving on. I'll go and get my CERB benefits and I'll be fine, okay? That will render you ineligible. Now, I want to kind of put a bit of a caveat on this. This is me putting on my lawyer's asterisk next to this and saying that I don't think that that's going to apply in all circumstances. Now, granted, we're still kind of working our way through this. I haven't seen a lot of the cases or a lot of the case studies being dealt with this. But for example, if your employer is, if maybe you're an older worker, or maybe you're immunocompromised, or maybe you've got really serious concerns about the health and safety of your workplace, and ultimately you come to the conclusion that you cannot continue working there as a result of your legitimate health and safety concerns. We might be able to look at that more. This is going to get a little bit complicated here, but that might be considered more of what's called like a constructive dismissal, meaning it's almost like your employer, by refusing to work with you and accommodate you on this, might actually push you into like a dismissal where you cannot in good faith stay there. And so in those kinds of circumstances, I think that there will be, you will be eligible for CERB. I really got to emphasize caution on this though. If you're thinking about leaving your job because you're unhappy with the working environment that you're in, make sure you get some advice on this before you go and pull the trigger on that, because it could lead to some very unfortunate outcomes if you're not very careful about it.
Thank you, David. These are some sound advice. And thank you. You've made it through our various scenarios, and I think that that's really helpful for everyone, because we're all coming at this question from a different angle. We've talked about the different benefits available. There's different triggers for different benefits. Is it possible that you would have a choice between one benefit or another?
Yeah, the answer here is not likely. So to kind of put a little bit of context to this, remember I referenced this date of March 15th. So if you were let go from your job before March 15th, then you should be falling into the regular EI stream that would have existed previously. If you were laid off from your job after March 15th, but before the CERB program was like fully implemented and operational, so there was like a window there where a lot of people were receiving EI benefits for a period of time, those will automatically convert to the CERB. Okay, it's not a choice. The government has stamped March 15th as being the date. And if you were released from work due to some COVID-19 related reason, either health or family obligations or recession related, work disruption related, you will automatically be flowing into the CERB. There's a few rare opportunities where you can still receive EI benefits after that March 15th date. And that's primarily going to be looking at people who are going on, for example, maternity or parental leave, where they're going to be job displaced, but it's not related to COVID at all. It's obviously going to be related to some other personal circumstance. Those people will continue to receive regular EI. I don't think they're going to have an option, though. There's not going to be a choice of one over the other. It'll just be dictated by the circumstances.
Excellent. Thank you, David. And our next question is one that has come in from a number of individuals. And it's the question of what happens if you apply for benefits, you receive benefits, and the government later determines that you're not eligible for benefits. Will they take the money back from you?
Oh, yeah. You have to anticipate that. Now, I don't want to cause alarm to people because the benefits, the eligibility requirements are designed to be large, okay? So most people, if they're acting honestly and in good faith, are going to have no trouble qualifying for this. Now, I want to just kind of speak to this briefly. When the CERB system went live, the government was primarily focused on just getting money out to people. So basically, if you applied and you went through and you checked all the boxes, then there's going to be a check coming to you on the way. They weren't going into great diligence in verifying the admissibility of eligibility like they would have previously done under the old EI system. They were more just interested in processing high volume, lots of people very quickly to get through all of that. Now, that being said, if an application was submitted fraudulently, or if an application was submitted where the person clearly was not eligible for it, there is going to be an audit of these applications at a later date. It's not happening right now, because I think everyone's just overwhelmed, but you can expect that if you are not eligible for these benefits, there will be an overpayment statement issued at some point in time, and the government will be looking to recapture on that.
Excellent, thank you. And David, I've got one last question for you before we turn to some live questions. And that is, how do you go about applying for these benefits?
Yeah, the simplest way is to go to the Government of Canada's website, to do it online. So my understanding, I've never actually had to do this, but my understanding is that you'll have to create an online profile. I understand it's pretty simple to put together. There's going to be banner ads and directing links all over the place. And the easiest way is going to be through an online application. Now, given that, you know, the 230 people that are watching this right now are doing this via webinar, my expectation is that you're going to have access to the internet and you'll be able to do this online. Otherwise, though, I think that there is some kind of fallback options for like a phone number that you can call, but the simplest, cleanest, quickest, most effective way of applying for benefits is going to be through the online application portal that the government provides.
Excellent, thank you, David. And we'll be posting a link to that portal on our webpage, along with the broadcast or the recording of this broadcast when we have that ready. So turning to some live questions. We have received a question from somebody who was in a situation where they they didn't feel comfortable in their work environment. They thought they had negotiated a layoff from their employer. They were given a record of employment marked, I believe it was E, and that is a signal for quit. And that individual would like to know what steps they should take if that's going to jeopardize their ability to get access to benefits.
Right. So the record of employment is going to be an important document. And what this really does is one of the functions is that the employer has to submit that to document the conditions ending employment. So if somebody, now obviously we're kind of getting to specifics here and it's hard to kind of parse through all of this. Number one though, if you feel that there's an inaccuracy on your record of employment, you should be going back to the employer explaining why you feel this is inaccurate and what kind of a correction you are looking for. It's really, really vitally important. It's quite easy for an employer to amend a record of employment. It actually happens all the time. And as long as there's some justification for the code for the end of employment, there won't be any barrier in processing that. Now, if the employer refuses, then you can actually raise it with usually it's done through Service Canada. Actually, under the old Employment Insurance Commission, it was all processed through Service Canada. I would expect there'd be a similar process with the CERB and with COVID-19. But you can contest the code used on the ROE with Service Canada. They might push back a little bit and say, what have you done to try to rectify this immediately with your employer? But when you do contest it, they can kind of go in and do their own little investigation and make their own determination as to what the actual reasons for separation were. So that's what I would recommend you do. Now, in terms of whether or not this will interfere with your CERB benefits, assume they will. I think that's the fair way of looking at it. Like I said, we're very quick in getting these applications processed and getting the money out, but expect that there might be an audit later. And obviously you're not going to want to have any kind of red flags or complications at a later date as a result of some misleading code being used on your ROE.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Another question coming in. If I'm getting both EI and the CERB, I applied twice, what do I do?
So I've heard kind of stories about this where people were receiving EI, and then when the CERB was announced, they applied again to get those benefits. Or I've also heard people that were on the old EI system and it's being converted into CERB, but they're still receiving like 2 payments. Recognize that you can't be eligible twice. So if it's not being flagged right now by the government, it will eventually be flagged, and that money is going to have to get paid back. So don't go spending it. Don't go spending it into a point where you can't recover it, okay? Because you're going to need to have access to that. Now, that being said, normally I would encourage people to be proactive in alerting the government that there's overpayments being created here, so that a process can be put in place to have that money reissued, and that your accounts can be corrected so that you're not receiving extra money. But with the stampede of people going to get these benefits right now, I can't imagine how difficult it would be to actually report this and to get somebody on the phone to alert it. So I think for right now, if you can't get through to somebody, just recognize that you will get an email at some point asking for that money back.
Yeah, and I guess going back to your earlier point, if you don't know if you're getting an EI benefit or a CERB benefit, you want to be conservative, because if it turns out to be a CERB benefit, you may owe tax on that down the road.
That's right. I mean, there will be some tax assessment done at some point in time.
Another question, do I keep my EI eligibility period once the CERB benefit is no longer available?
Yeah, good question. And this one here, so I think to kind of put a little bit of context to the question that's being raised here, is that remember the CERB currently only has a duration of 16 weeks. So, there's some conversation about whether or not that's going to be extended. I think a lot of it is kind of wait and see. But let's assume for a second that you're on the CERB, the economy reopens to some degree, but you're still job detached. You don't have a job to go back to. And now what's going to happen to you at the end of these 16 weeks? You should be able to qualify for regular employment insurance benefits, and they should be converted over to that. That's my expectation. We're doing a little bit of kind of forward thinking here, but if you are otherwise eligible for EI, you should be eligible for the to have that continue. Now, I guess one question that I would have that I'm not quite clear on, just so everybody's aware of this, is what happens if you're not normally qualifying for EI, but you do qualify for the CERB, right? We talked about, parents staying home with children or caring for loved ones, or what, usually self-employed or gig economy workers, people like that. So for those people, when their CER benefits come to a close, what options are going to be available to them if they don't normally qualify for regular EI? I don't know. It's anybody's guess right now.
Okay, thank you, David. I think we have time for this one last question before we conclude today's webinar. What if I lost my job just before the state of emergency? Can I still apply for CERB? How will the government know or find out?
Again, let's come back to that key date, March 15th. So if you lost your job prior to March 15th, regardless of how that job loss came about, okay, then you're going to have to qualify for employment insurance through that regular stream, that regular route that you would normally be expected to take. And in order to qualify for that, you would have to have a certain number of minimum hours worked, and you would have to have other certain eligibility requirements, but usually it's based around hours of work, okay? If you lost your job after March 15th, you're then going to go down the CERB route. So I don't actually recall when these states of emergency were announced at different levels in the different municipalities and provinces and governments and whatnot. But for your EI benefits and for your CERB benefits, the key date to keep in mind is March 15th. That will determine which way you need to go.
Excellent. David, thank you. Thank you so much. That really concludes the question portion of today's webinar, and it's been so helpful. Thank you so much for all that you shared with us, David. For attendees, a few resources on this page. Number one is David's his firm's blog, which is a wonderful resource. And if you need legal advice and you'd like to reach out, the email address here, help@kentemploymentlaw.com. You can feel free to reach out there. For Peoples, we've also got a number of resources on our website that are COVID related. And we've listed peopleslawschool.ca/COVID, and that will take you to a number of resources. There's a couple of pages that talk about these benefits that could be helpful to you. We've also recently posted answers to questions that came out of our earlier webinar, the April 3rd webinar about workers' rights in BC. So you may want to check those out as well. And we've got a page that is dedicated to sort of COVID-related questions. So in addition to employment, ability to pay rent, deferring bills, questions about COVID-related scams, and we're posting new information as it becomes available. We've also recently launched our chatbot, so that's that cute beagle that you see on your screen. It's available on Facebook, and it will answer questions about COVID-related problems and also help you fetch the answers to your everyday legal problems. So we invite you to check that out as well. And as you sign off today, you'll be invited to complete a survey. We would really appreciate you filling that survey out. It's short, it's 5 questions. And we use that information to design programming for you. So this webinar in particular was a result of an expression of interest from you, and we would love to produce more of these types of webinars and other legal information for all of you. So please, we encourage you to fill out that survey as you log off. And a big, big thank you. A big thank you to you, David. Again, can't emphasize how helpful this has been, and really appreciate your joining us today. You answered these questions beautifully, and much appreciate all the time that you're spending and helping us with this. And a big thank you to everybody who has joined us today. It's really wonderful to have your participation and to be able to connect with you and be able to share some of this information with you, especially during this period of uncertainty and where the rules and laws are changing so quickly. So thank you again, everybody. Wishing you all, an excellent week, wishing everybody excellent health, and thank you again.